Welcome in, everybody, to the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast. I'm your co-host, Billy Muzio. With me, as always, my partner in crime, Jody Smith. Tonight, we're going to be running through some of the positional players as well as quarterbacks that are going to be making major impacts on your fantasy rosters. They're going to be affecting the skill position players and anything and everything in between. Let's just kick it off tonight, Jody. We'll start with Brock Purdy. I have to say, Brock Purdy looked pretty good in the absence of Jimmy G when he went down in Week 13 with that ankle injury. Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant in the 2022 draft class. That was pick 7.41. He's out of Iowa, 6'1", 212 pounds. He went 25 for 37, 210 yards here in Week 13. 2 touchdowns, 1 interceptions, 14.3 fantasy points, Jody. How does this affect the skill position players for SF moving forward? Who does this benefit the most? Who takes the biggest hit? And what can we expect from this offense moving forward?
Well, it's really, like I said, it's really hard to say. When you look overall at the numbers actually looked promising last week, but when you actually dig a little deeper, like Pro Football Focus, if you take his grades from what he did, what he's done, he comes out at the equivalent of around QB 32. I know this has been a hectic week for Football Focus, so you can read or not read into whatever you want with them. But I think overall it's fine. It's not like Jimmy Garoppolo was lighting the world on fire. He went through a nice little stretch there, about a month ago, where he was, from a fantasy perspective, was doing really well. But he was also prone to these games, kind of what we saw from Purdy last week, where it was like, they're moving the ball okay, and he's getting the ball, he's doing what he's supposed to with the ball. But as far as who it might benefit, I don't know. It feels like it probably would benefit the running game even more so than what you were seeing before, because you had to think they're going to come up with a more conservative game plan. I personally would like to see them get Deebo Samuel more involved, in that particular regard, because they simply aren't doing it. Since they've acquired Christian McCaffrey, Deebo has his numbers have really, really fallen off, and Brandon Ayuk has become the main wide receiver there in San Francisco. That's probably exactly what you'll see, continue. It would be nice if they can maybe look at some things a little differently with Purdy and get the ball to their tight end, get the ball to Deebo Samuel and all that. But, until we see it actually happen. And this week, you look at their game this week, it's either the lowest or second lowest over under for the week. So it's not like we're expecting, a huge shootout back and forth. This might be the kind of game where they take a more conservative approach and let the rookie see what he can do with a full game plan and a full week of preparation. Overall, he's not someone he's not going to be as good as Jimmy Garoppolo, as much as I hesitate to call Jimmy Garoppolo a guy you kind of want as a starter every week. I had to pick him up in the Scott Fishbowl. Somehow I've managed to make it into the playoffs round 3. But
Congratulations.
I would have. Oh, yeah, thanks. Are you still in it?
Oh, hell no. My team sucks this year.
Yeah, I had Aaron Rodgers. As disappointing as my Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers start in that draft has managed to be, somehow I moved on. But I was using Jacoby Brissett a little bit here and there too, but obviously that's not good anymore. So I had to pick him up. So we'll see.
Yeah, so I think the player who's going to benefit the most is Christian McCaffrey. We saw him last week. He had 42 routes, 93.3 route rate, which is the highest he's seen all season by a significant margin as well. We also saw 83.5% snap share out of Christian McCaffrey last week, 17 carries. I know Deebo's a little banged up. I do expect Deebo to get a little bit more involved once he's fully healthy, especially since the Niners are lacking running backs. And we saw this last year when they were down running backs, that they heavily involved Deebo in the run game. That being said, as soon as Christian McCaffrey was traded to the Niners week 7, I went on Twitter and said that this was going to be horrible for Deebo Samuel because the involvement that Deebo had in the run game. It just, they had no means or necessary, didn't have any particular reason to run him into the ground in the run game like they had been prior. And, now with no Elijah Moore, it changes things up a little bit. That being said, he's still a little banged up. Don't fully expect Deebo to be fully entrenched into the run game like we had seen in the past. That being said as well, Brock Purdy also went to Twitter and mentioned that he wanted to get Brandon Ayuk more involved, mentioned that he missed him on a few passes last week, and he wanted to make sure that he made up for that here in Week 14. What type of involvement do you think, Brandon Ayuk is going to have this week? What type of involvement do you think George Kittle is going to have this week? Or do you think they're going to play it pretty safe and run a bunch of screen games with Christian McCaffrey, with Deebo Samuel, and potentially even Brandon Ayuk?
That's probably I would lean towards looking at Kyle Shanahan's history. This is a guy who's been a backfield guru throughout his whole coaching carousel in the NFL, even dating back to Washington and here in Houston. It seemed like it was always a next man up situation for them. So they should be coached up and well enough to the point where George Kittle has had a maddeningly frustrating lack of involvement pretty much all year. So it's almost like it really can't get much worse. I know Kittle missed some time earlier, but since he's been back, he's been, way more missed than he's been hit. And that's something that I'd like to see them fix. The adage is always that when you have an inexperienced or younger quarterback and they rely on a lot of dump off passes and they rely on their tight ends, well, that remains to be seen. If that plays out, well, then, yeah, hopefully we can get more targets for George Kittle and for more involvement for Deebo Samuel. It's kind of what I'm hoping for. It's not the best matchup. The Bucs, the defense overall has tailed off a little bit, but they're still a top 10 fantasy defense when it comes to limiting quarterbacks. So it's not the best matchup. And like I said, just a minute ago, this has with the second lowest over-under for the week. So, you don't want to go out of your way to target too many people in this game, but Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, these guys are every week starters anyway. And in particular, in a week where 6 teams are off this week, I mean, you don't want to go out of your way to necessarily plug 49ers in your lineup, but you're still starting the same guys.
So Buccaneers, like you said, top 10, number 10 versus the quarterback position. They are bottom 4 versus the tight end position. They are top 4 versus the running back position. That being said, they have allowed 3 touchdowns in the air to opposing running backs, which is where Christian McCaffrey makes his living. I would not be surprised to see a pretty heavily involved George Kittle this week. I know his involvement has been frustrating, like you stated earlier. Last week, though, he did see a 97.8% route rate, which was the highest he's seen all year, again, by a significant margin, 4% more than his highest, which was Week 10 versus the Los Angeles Chargers. He did finish as the tight end 28 last week in PPR, non-tight end premium. He has only had 4 top 10 finishes all season. He has been pretty frustrating to own. That being said, you have a banged up Deebo. You have a bottom 4 Tampa Bay defense versus the tight end. I'm feeling like it could be a potentially big week for George Kittle. Moving on to the next positional player I want to talk about is Tyler Huntley. Lamar Jackson went down Week 13 with a PCL sprain. The average time to recover is roughly 2 to 3 weeks. In the absence last year of Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, we saw him in Week 11, where he was quarterback number 18. Week 14, he was quarterback number 19. Week 15, quarterback number 1. Week 17, quarterback 21. And then Week 18, he was quarterback 33. In those weeks, Andrews also finished as Week 11, tight end 5, Week 14, tight end 2, Week 15, tight end 2, Week 17, tight end 3, and Week 18, tight end 4. It's clear and obvious that Andrews is probably going to be funneled in this offense, seeing the history that he has with Huntley. Outside of Andrews, how do you expect this offense to move forward here in the absence of Lamar Jackson, and where do you rank Tyler Huntley?
It's odd. Somebody had posted on Twitter earlier this week that juxtaposed the numbers for Lamar Jackson and Huntley, as from a fantasy perspective, they tend to be, somewhat below average from week to week when it comes to passing, but are, towards the elite echelon when it comes to runners. And Huntley's like that. You mentioned his kind of erratic finishes last year in these games, but he had over 40 rushing yards every single game, and we know how that adds up for quarterbacks. In particular, that 1 week where he finished QB number 1, 4 total touchdowns, but 73 yards and a couple of scores through the ground. So that's massive. And, in this particular offense and in this particular matchup, that's kind of, what I expected that they're going to go with. Mark Andrews, clearly at worst every week is your tight end too. So, I mean, there's not a lot of area for him to fall to. But other than that, with the way that the Ravens have utilized their receivers, I mean, 1 week it's DeMarcus Robinson, and then Devin Duvernay started the year off hot, had 5 touchdowns early in the season. Well, here we are, 6-7 weeks later, he's still stuck on 5. He hasn't been doing much, and the target share has been a little inconsistent with the Ravens wideouts, and it's a really, really intriguing matchup against the Steelers, who have had problems all year against wide receivers, and have had problems all year against quarterbacks. But this game is, you're talking about the over-under for the previous game in San Francisco. This one actually is a point less, at 36.5 for the Ravens and Steelers. So, and we saw Baltimore last week mustered all of 10 points. So they should be able to top that this week, but it would be hard for me to put them on, more than 19 to 21 points in there. So it's not a matchup I'm really going out of my way. I think Huntley, because of his rushing upside, I'll pull up my rankings real quick here. I think he's sneaky, offers, in a week when 6 players are not available, for the most part, they're kind of garbage teams, to be honest. It's like, kind of like they did us a favor. A lot of teams are trying to clinch their playoff spot, so all the bad teams are not available this week. But I think Huntley, he can contend with QB1 numbers, I think, in this particular matchup. I have him at QB 15 right now, and that's without me. I haven't done the brunt of my research and my, Billy, the grind that we put in every week to do this. So starting off at 15 is actually, pretty respectable. Like I said, that the rushing upside, you're all in with that. And as far as the Baltimore passing game, I have some interest in Huntley and of course, Mark Andrews. But after that, it's something to, even with the matchup, it's something that I'm trying to fade.
Yeah, he gets Pittsburgh Steelers, who are bottom 8 versus the quarterback position. The ECR right now is quarterback 16. That's 1 spot behind Daniel Jones, who's facing Philadelphia. It's 1 spot above Tom Brady facing SF. 2 spots above Mike White, who's had a surprisingly 2-game streak. It's also 3 spots ahead of Mac Jones, who gets Arizona, who's pretty beatable against the quarterback position, and just in general the defense as a whole as well. And so it's a pretty safe spot for him, I think, if you think about his upside as a rusher, and then against the secondary, who's been constantly defeated from the wide receiver position. That being said, Deontay Johnson, absent at practice today. I think we're going to have to see what his weapons look like heading into this match. Quarterback 15, I think, is probably about the right area. I would not be surprised to see him move down a spot or 2 if Deontay Johnson is ruled out, leaving him with just Pickens and his running back core, as well as his tight end. But that being said, I think that's probably about the right area. Sorry?
Were you talking about Kenny Pickett? You're talking about Deontay Johnson?
No, Deontay Johnson versus. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yes. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. Talking about Pickett as well as versus Baltimore. Pickett comes in as 21, so just slightly below Tyler Huntley. But yeah. Moving on, we have a lot of start-sit questions here. Let's hop into some of these, and then we'll hop into the running backs we have. Is Baker Mayfield starting tonight? The news I saw today was that he was not, because Walford was cleared to play. Have you heard anything else, Jody?
The most recent I saw is that Mayfield was taking most of the first team snaps and warm-ups, but I know all 3 quarterbacks are active. They're being really coy about how they're going to utilize them. So it feels like a situation, not like you need to go out of your way to avoid starting Rams, but in particular, we don't know what they're doing. I mean, you could argue that Baker Mayfield is a significant upgrade over John Walford, or you could argue the other way around and say that he's barely, it's the same guy, It just, and you're talking about just signed with them this week. Not even more than a couple of days ago. So it feels like, I don't know. But that's the latest I read right before we jumped on live here was that all three quarterbacks are active, but as of who's starting, no idea.
Yeah, I think it's Wolford tonight just because of the short turnaround for Baker. That being said, if Baker, for whatever reason, did start, he'd be the first quarterback in 7 years to start for two teams on the season. And Baker Mayfield, not a strong suggestion. If you're that desperate at quarterback, your season's probably not looking that promising here towards the end. Let's move on to the next question from Daniel Duong. Struggling at quarterback, streamer this week. Deshaun Watson versus Cincinnati, Tanny versus Jacksonville, Mike White versus Buffalo, or Mac Jones versus Arizona. Which way you leaning?
Billy, you just talked about the Mac Jones matchup. On paper, that's a really good matchup. The Cardinals are allowing the third most fantasy points. It's just that, Jones has been so frustrating that the 1 week that I really downgraded him was, for Thanksgiving. And then he came out of nowhere and threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, whatever it was. And then, dipped back down right afterwards. On paper, that's your best matchup. With the way Mike White has played over the last couple of weeks, though, I'm kind of interested in that. I know the Bills are ninth fewest fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, but still, I'm not opposed to that matchup. The guy's just been so good. He's getting the ball downfield. He's just aggressively looking to target Elijah Moore and to target Garrett Wilson, which I've liked what I've seen from a fantasy perspective. I know, he only had 1 touchdown last week, but still, I think on paper, Mac Jones. Who was your other choice?
The choices were Deshaun Watson, Tannehill, Mike White, or Mac Jones.
You probably need some time with Deshaun Watson. I mean, clearly he's the best quarterback in the group, especially from a rushing standpoint and from a fantasy perspective. But this is not a particular good the matchup. The Bengals are allowing the 5th or 6th fewest fantasy points to quarterback, and it's as bad as Watson looked last week. I'd need to see it from him first. I'd need to see him, earn it before I wanted to trot him out there in that particular matchup.
I mean, we talked about the podcast. We said he was going to be rusty. 700 days without playing football. He stepped in and played the Houston Texans, who are sneaky good in the secondary, and especially versus the quarterback and wide receiver position. I think I'm starting Mike White here. Mike White has been the truth, man. I mean, you look at what he has done in his active games this year. So 2 weeks now, thrown for 300 yards in both those games. He has, 3 touchdowns against Chicago. He had 0 touchdowns last week, but
he ran for 1.
He ran for 1, exactly. But Buffalo is tough. That being said, they're probably going to be trailing. They're going to be throwing a lot more. I think the game script favors Mike White, and we saw him be able to move the ball here in both games. I like Mike White. I mean, I'm starting him in a lot of places here in high-stakes leagues, especially the FFWC, where it matters the most as well. In some leagues that it's going to take to require, a win in order to secure a dominator, that's $10,000. I'm starting Mike White this week. So I have a lot of confidence in Mike White. You look at, he comes in as the quarterback 18 in ECR. He's going to be probably in that 15 to 16 round range for me. He's going to be moved up a couple spots. I'm going to have him probably ahead of Daniel Jones, who faces Philadelphia. I'm going to have him ahead of Tyler Huntley, even though Huntley has a decent matchup. I'm probably going to have him ahead of Tom Brady, who's facing SF as well. So I like Mike White. I think he's been a phenomenal start the last couple weeks, and I think it's going to continue here throughout the rest of the season. Next question we have is from Trey S. Full PPR, start 2, Juju, Boyd, Singletary, Judy, or Rashad White?
You can't let the matchup for the Chiefs going to Denver. Juju has really, since he came back from the concussion, his play has really fallen off. And like I said, this is a really, really bad matchup. In particular, if they decide to shadow him with their rookie corner, why is his name escaping me? Surtain. That's not a very good matchup at all for Smith-Schuster. I'm actually kind of kind of, I mean, it's easy to look at the matchup with Denver and start downgrading Chiefs, but you can only drop Patrick Mahomes so far. Like if you're dropping Patrick Mahomes out of your top 5, it feels like you're just being too cute. The wideouts, that's a different situation altogether, though, because it's just been so unpredictable and a little erratic trying to figure out. I think I keep saying erratic, but it's been a little tough to pigeonhole which wide receiver is going to go off for the Chiefs from week to week. So, I mean, you could probably still arguably put Smith-Schuster as a wide receiver 3 this week, but he's just a guy that I'm not really going out of my way to try to put in the lineup simply because it's been rough the last couple of games, and now the matchup is even worse. So, I mean, not anyone I'm too excited about. I think you said Devin Singletary. That's another fade for me this week. The Jets are a legitimate defense, but more worrisome for Devin Singletary was James Cook's usage last week. Cook outsnapped him. It was far more effective in all facets of the game, and kind of has been all season. He's been better as a runner. He's been better in the receiving game. So the Bills don't always do what we think they're going to do. You know, they're one of them teams, but it feels like maybe that was the coming out party for Cook, and that, you know, this could be it could be a swift decline for Singletary. So he's a guy that I really wouldn't want to go out of my way to get into lineups this week either.
So it's interesting. Juju last week, despite the lackluster finish in fantasy points, he did see the most snaps at the wide receiver position on the roster, 76.4%. The next closest receiver was Justin Watson at 61.8%, and then Marquez Valdes-Scantling at 56.4%. And again, they faced, Cincinnati, who is the 4th toughest versus the wide receiver position. So I think I'm going to chop it up to just a tough matchup for Juju on his first week back from injury, because prior to that, I mean, Juju was on fire prior to that concussion. You look at the fantasy finishes that he had. Week 6, he was wide receiver 7. Week 7, wide receiver 4. Week 9, wide receiver 8. And then he saw wide receiver 69, got hurt, 69 again, and then 56 last week. So he's one of the toughest, I think, wide receivers to rank last week and again this week, because he has the talent and he's on the team that can enable him to be a top 20, 15 wide receiver. The matchup is tough, like you stated. That's what's one concern. The injury and his involvement in the offense is another concern. Though 76% of snaps is great. It's not his normal, but still, it's trending in the right direction. I probably lean Juju as the second here, is where I'm going with this long rant. I also lean Jeudy as well, because we're looking like we're going to have no Sutton this week, who's coming off that hamstring injury, which would leave Jeudy to be the wide receiver 1. It's going to leave Dulcich to be the number 2 option in the passing game. You're going to be able to stack this game as well, and I'd probably lean that way. We want to see what happens, though. There's a lot of pending information with this start-sit, because Fournette popped up on the injury report today with another injury, and we got to monitor that and see what happens, because if whatever reason he's a surprise inactive, I don't expect it to happen, but it's the NFL. You never know what's going to happen. So we want to make sure we're monitoring those inactives and those injury reports. And if that does happen, Rachaad White is an immediate start. I mean, you can't sit Rachaad White. That being said, as of today, right, 12/8/2022, I'm starting Juju and Jeudy. Next question we have is, what's going on with OBJ? Can we safely drop him? Absolutely, we can drop him. No. News from the Cowboys is they don't think he's going to be ready for about 5 more weeks. That's goodbye playoffs for fantasy. He's not going to be playing at any time in the fantasy game for us in 2022. Maybe he has some involvement for a contender down the stretch in playoffs, but from a fantasy perspective, you can drop him.
I don't know if he's refusing to take physicals, but it seemed like somebody implied that he doesn't necessarily want to them looking at his knee too deeply, and it also sounds like he wants big money, so he's going to end up just needing to go back into free agency, I think, after the season.
Okay, let's go ahead and hop back into the show sheet. Let's go to the running backs now, and then we'll hop back over here to some start sit questions. I want to talk about Kenneth Walker. So Kenneth Walker suffered an ankle injury. The head coach Pete Carroll referred to as a strain rather than a sprain. The rookie running back was a non-participant to open the practice this week. That leaves his game status for the weekend very much up in the air. In what is a convoluted situation in Seattle. It's always convoluted with Pete Carroll. That being said, do you think Walker plays this week? And if not, who is the running back to own?
No, I think they err on the side of caution, and I think they go ahead and let him sit out. The Seahawks are a legitimate playoff contender. I mean, who would have thought that a few months ago? But I think they have a legitimate shot, and this should be a winnable game against a pretty pathetic Carolina team. They should be able to rely almost entirely on Geno in the passing game against Carolina. So it feels like, as long as he's healthy, it feels like Travis Homer had become the running back 2 as of late. He was getting more snaps than DJ Dallas before last week. I know Dallas had to actually come back from being ruled doubtful in the game because it got so thin. But then they were down to Tony Jones and Dallas. But I think Travis Homer, he's the guy that they have been using to spell Kenneth Walker. He's coming on some change of pace role. He's throughout his career he's been kind of a third down guy. That's probably what they would go with. I would feel like if they were somehow this week, if they toned back their run game and they gave their running backs say 20 total touches, it feels like Travis Homer would be 12 to 14 of those carries. It feels like, of the total touches. He's a guy, I guess, on a thin week with 6 teams off. You could consider, if you can pick him up on the waiver wire, I guess you consider putting him in as a flex spot. But again, like you implied, Billy, we have to actually let this situation play out first. We need a couple more days of practice to see if he's fully healthy. Because remember, he was trending towards playing last week, and they decided to be cautious with him and let him rest, which is, again, what I think that they probably do with Walker. If not, if Walker's healthy, even with the risk of him being on some sort of limited snap count next week, you start him. That's the way I would look at it. If he's active, you're starting him. But I kind of, as a person that has Walker in several teams, I kind of feel like I'd like him to be healthy for the playoffs that really matter. So I would prefer that they actually sit him this week.
So Homer comes in as my running back 37 this week. I'm plus 15 versus ECR. Nice. I think it is going to be a Homer week. We look at what he did last week. He finished as running back 23 in PPR. He had 3 targets, 2 receptions, 53 total yards, and a score. He did see a 20% route rate as well, 20.6% snap share. That's back to week 12, sorry, not week 13. And you look prior to that, he had 2 finishes inside the top 40, and then a couple when they're in that 50 to 60 range. I think his involvement, it's clear and obvious that he's one of the most trusted backs in this offense. And they're facing Carolina, who is the 21st ranked defense versus the running back position. It is interesting, though, to see the snap counts from last week. DJ Dallas was heavily involved, saw 47.8% of snaps, but also kind of battling an injury this week. Tony Jones saw 34.3% of snaps, who seems to be the only healthy running back on this roster. And Tony Jones, again, came over from the Saints this year. He saw 7 attempts last week, but only 14 yards. So that's a 2-yard average per carry. He did see 4 targets, 2 receptions, and 18 more yards. So I've never been a huge Tony Jones fan, but we may break down to just who is the healthiest back in this offense, because we have Homer, who's battling an injury, Dallas battling an injury, and DJ Dallas and Tony Jones is the only healthy running back on the roster right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here moving forward. I lean Homer as of right now. He's my start of the week, and tomorrow I have Jim Coventry coming on. We're going to discuss our rankings, and Homer's going to be on that discussion for me for sure. Moving along, Donta Foreman. running back for the Carolina Panthers here. He did not practice and then a limited practice. He's coming off the Panthers bye week. I was surprised to see him on the non-participant list with the foot issue. I mean, that's never a good sign coming off a bye week and he's still hurt, or a surprise hurt, I should say. However, head coach Steve Wilks told reporters he's not too concerned about Foreman's status for Sunday, although Wilks did add that he does not know if Foreman will practice Thursday. That being said, fantasy managers need to start looking elsewhere, and we saw the lack of involvement in the passing game from Foreman, which is a concern. It's very game script dependent. That being said, where do you rank Chuba Hubbard in your ranks this week? Maybe let's start off with saying that Foreman is sitting.
Oh, lose you, Billy?
I'm here. You there?
Yeah, you flashed off for a second there.
Yeah, so let's assume that Foreman is. So just kind of fancy me here. Let's rank Chuba Hubbard as if Foreman's sitting, and then where do you rank him if Hubbard was active?
Well, let's take a look. So, sorry, computers are acting real slow. I have Foreman around RB20 right now, and that's obviously it's a really, really great matchup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Seattle bottom 4.
Bottom five fantasy defense against running backs. Hubbard, let's see. His name's not popping out to me. I want to say he's in the 40. Yeah, there he is, RB40. So let's say Foreman is ruled out. I think at that point, in a week, again, with so many teams off, you really have to consider Chuba Hubbard would be in an RB2 range. So you're talking somewhere, I mean, it would be a lesser RB2 just because we don't know how they would divvy up carries. And also there's the other kid, what's his name?
Raheem Blackshear.
Yes. He's been pretty effective when given touches. So it feels like it would be it probably would be more like a 65-35 split between those two. And at that point, I would probably have Chuba somewhere around, I don't know, RB 28 to RB 33, somewhere in that range. And the other kid would be closer to 40 to 45.
I'm nodding because I agree with everything you just said, Jody. I think that hits the hammer on the nail. Let's move on. DeAndre Swift, last running back I want to talk about tonight. Is he officially back? I mean, we saw him last week, finished as running back 4 in PPR leagues, 21.1 fantasy points, 48.8% route rate. He had 5 red zone carries last week, Jody. That was not Jamal Williams' 5. It was DeAndre Swift. 51.4% snap shares. The first time since week 8 he's eclipsed the 50% rate, and only the third time all year. I mean, I think he's back.
It certainly felt like it. And the thing is, they were honest. Dan Campbell was honest last week when he said, "This is the week that we're going to bring DeAndre Swift. We feel like he's 100%, and we're going to put him back in." And they sure did. Like you said, the key thing was those red zone touches. And where Jamal Williams has made his living this year, he still leads the league. I think is he up to 14
touchdowns. He's got 2 more touchdowns than Russell Wilson has bathrooms.
That's such a great idea to update that every week. But who would have thought that back in August or September? Jeez. But with the way this offense is designed, I think it's perfectly fine for both of those backs to be used. But it feels like to me that DeAndre Swift certainly is back, and in this week, you're taking on a Minnesota defense that's bottom 10 against fantasy running backs this season. So it feels like Swift. If that kind of snap share and route participation and red zone touches are staying in line, you can start arguing Swift back as a top 15 guy every week. If anything, it might have a slightly negative effect on Williams because Williams' bread and butter has been coming in short yardage. But if DeAndre Swift's getting some of those valuable red zone snaps, that's just fewer touches for Williams to kind of accumulate. But
so you just teed it up for me, Jody. That was my next question. Can we trust Jamal Williams moving forward? He only saw 29 0.7% of snaps last week. That was the lowest we've seen all year from him. He still scored because that's all he does is score touchdowns. But can we rely on him as an RB2 moving forward? That's pretty much what he's been. High-end RB2, back-end RB2 on a week-to-week basis.
I mean, the kid has 14 touchdowns in 13 games, so it's really hard to set there, even with Swift now taking on this load, especially like this week. Again, so many players are missing. I mean, how do you look at a guy with 14 touchdowns in 13 games and be like, okay, well, I'm going to move on from him since he's going to be losing so many touches. So, yes, I would still feel like I can trust him in particular in a matchup against a bottom 10 run defense. And let's keep in mind, if they continue to bring him in and let him have most, if not all, of the carries inside the 2-yard line, all it takes is a pass interference penalty in the end zone to get them that 1st and goal, the 1 and all that, and then it's going to be probably still going to be his territory. So, yeah, in this matchup, even with the reduced snap count overall and the reduced role, I still feel like you can trust him. If he manages to, kind of lay an egg in this game, if DeAndre Swift gets a short yardage touchdown in this game, and Williams has fewer than 50 total scrimmage yards and no score, and again plays around, like you said, 29 to 30 something percent of snaps, 2 games in a row, then it could be a concern. But until that happens, yeah, I still trust him.
Okay, that is it for the show sheet. Let's finish off the night with some start-sit questions. We have Jose, who wants to know who to start. Gabe Davis, Lockett, or Pickens. 1 point PPR. Pick one, I'm assuming.
Oh, Lockett? Tyler Lockett was one of your choices? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that, we just hit on that. I think Seattle's going to rely more on their passing game this week. Tyler Lockett's been red hot for over a month straight now, so you absolutely have to keep starting.
Yeah, Tyler Lockett has been just a must start. He finished as the wide receiver 5 last week, wide receiver 18 in week 12, did a bye week 11, and wide receiver 28 and wide receiver 10 on week 9.
And it's a good matchup too.
I agree. Yep. Next question we have is, which defense do you like more? The Ravens versus the Browns, versus Rusty Watson, Green Bay versus the Rams versus Mayfield. I'm kind of confused on this question.
Yeah, the Ravens are playing the Steelers, not the Browns.
I don't think that's accurate because Green Bay's on a bye as well. So we're going to skip that question. Okay. Better stash at wide receiver, Boyd, Elijah Moore, or Dotson? I like Dotson.
You're talking dynasty. Yeah, Dotson, first rounder. It's a rookie year. He's had his moment.
I don't think they're starting. I don't think they're considering dynasty. I think it's season long because they're talking about a stash.
Well, I may lean towards Elijah Moore just because that's my boy, and I really like what I've seen out of Mike White the last couple of games. So,
okay, we split there. Then I go Dotson, Jody goes Moore. So you got to be the decision maker there, Naughty. Next one we have is start James Cook over Rachaad White at running back number 2. What do you think about that?
Tough matchup for Rachaad White, but what was more of a concern for me was how Leonard Fournette looked last on Monday night. It felt like they trusted Fournette again, and this was going to be more of a at best a 50-50 committee, and in a matchup in San Francisco that doesn't sound like a really appealing fantasy situation. However, if Billy reminded us that Fournette popped up on the injury report kind of mysteriously today. So, keep an eye on that. Obviously, if Fournette somehow rolled out, even though it's a tough matchup, if, Rachaad White's going to get all the carries, clearly you lean that direction.
Yeah, and I just want to say that because these games are not tonight, you have plenty of time to decide. I'm going to drop the Discord channel invite inside the chat right now. So if you are not a member of our Discord channel, go ahead and join. It's right there for you. I just posted it inside of YouTube. Go ahead and join Discord. There's a couple different channels that you can ask start sit advice in there. There's a Muzio member channel. There's also the general fantasy channel that Jody answers a lot of fantasy questions as well. But you are able to ask that question here on Saturday night once we have a little bit more information. So come on back to that Saturday, and we'd be more than happy to answer that for you. This one's for tonight, Jody. Would you play Derek Carr tonight, or Ryan Tannehill, or Deshaun Watson?
I have Carr ranked ahead of him. It's as imposing as the Rams defense has been, it's fallen off. Jalen Ramsey feels like I think he's given up an NFL high 7 touchdown receptions in his coverage this season. The Rams are playing without Aaron Donald. I have Carr as a borderline QB1 this week, and to me, that's about the hype you can rank Derek Carr, just because throughout his career he's kind of been inconsistent. But I believe I have him at 12th this week. I have Watson 2 or 3 spots behind him. I have questions if the Rams are going to be able to mount enough offense to sustain drives tonight. So that kind of, if they're doing a lot of 3 and out and a lot of punting, that just means more and more opportunities for the Raiders. So I feel like as much as Carr is an unimpressive fantasy starter, this feels like the kind of week where, okay, if one of your guys somehow are even riding Justin Fields or whatnot, and Carr is your number 2, I think he's a fine option.
Okay. Next question we have. I go Carr tonight pretty easily over both these guys, quite frankly. Next one we have is that's the same question. Morneau, or I call him Chigo. I can't say his full name, so I'm going to call him Chigo.
Or Titans tight end.
Yeah, Titans.
Chiggy. I saw somebody call him Chiggy today. That seems like.
It's like Albert OK, right? We just can't say his full name, so we're just gonna give him a nickname.
Well, no, the Broncos just did us a favor. They just make him inactive every week, so we want to talk about him.
Yeah, so true. I'm pretty easily Morneau here. I think I have Morneau looking at my tight end rankings right now. Morneau is my tight end 10, where Chiggy, we'll call him Chiggy. Chiggy's my tight end 17.
Yeah, the Titans are still utilizing a lot of. They still have Austin Hooper. They're running some 12 sets, and you have to like what you've seen out of him. But Moreau has just been really, really good coming in and taking up all the reps for the Raiders, and he's like way higher. Yeah, he's a top 10. He's a top 10 option this week, and in particular, like I said, I just kind of said that if we don't even know who the Rams are, starting a quarterback as of right now, but if they have problems sustaining drives, it just means more and more opportunities for the Raiders. So.
Okay, next one we have is, do you trust James Cook this week?
Trust. It's not a particularly great matchup. The Jets are a legitimate defense. I'd like, honestly, to see one more week of this really impressive usage that he had last week. But I'd have a hard time if I had Cook on a roster in a week with just 26 teams active. I'd have a hard time sitting him. So, I mean, that's kind of a subjective question. Trust, no, because of the crazy usage, but I'm really intrigued and really interested. I'd like to put him in a matchup, and it would depend on, like, your other options this week. Maybe you could hit us up on Discord and maybe explain what your other choices, what your thought process is in there. Like I said, it feels like it's a tough question. Do you trust him? I mean, I want to. I really want to, but the coaching staff for 12, 13 weeks showed us that we really can't.
I don't know. Last week he saw 43 or 42.7% of snaps.
If you tell me that that's going to kind of continue or whatever, then yeah, absolutely.
He saw 37.1% of the route rate. I mean, that was like almost 10x versus average week. I agree. If you could promise it's going to continue, I mean, they're going to be playing the Jets. Maybe they get ahead. They lean on the run.
Guard, or is this an anomaly week where he just went off and they go right back to Singletary? That's like I said, that's what makes the word trust a little difficult.
Yeah, trust is a strong word. How about ETN or Swift this week? Which one do you like?
Yes.
Yes is the answer. I have
probably from a total snap standpoint. Look, I think a few of us last week kind of thought JaMycal Hasty, after his breakout the previous week, would come through and have a little bit of a role this week. Nope. Travis Etienne went right back to the touch and snap and target monster that he's been. So at that point, I feel like he's clearly going to be the number one guy there, taking all the carries. He's probably a really good bet for 20 plus touches. So I don't feel like he's going to be. He's not losing potentially goal line reps to Jamal Williams. So I'll have, as much as I like Swift. I think they're both top 15 plays. Etienne will be inside my top 10.
Yeah, Etienne saw 49 snaps. That was 87.5% of the snap share. JaMychal Hasty only saw 3 snaps last week, 5.4%. He was actually out-snapped by Snoop Connor, who saw 4 snaps for 7.1%. So I have actually him and Etienne and Swift back-to-back in rankings. I have them at 10 and 11 currently. I do have Swift slightly ahead at 10 because of the Tennessee matchup. Tennessee is actually very tough versus the run, where Minnesota gives up a little bit more to the fantasy points. So I'd lean Swift in this aspect, but it's really hard. I was actually debating this earlier today, going back and forth on it because of the snap shares. I mean, we've seen Etienne with just heavy snap shares for Swift who's kind of getting back into that role. But from a matchup perspective, I'd like to match up more for Swift. So slight lean for Swift for me over Etienne. That being said, if you want to follow the snaps, go ahead and go with Travis Etienne. How about Cook or Pickens?
James Cook or Pickens?
Mm-hmm.
What was I reading earlier that it might be Pro Football Focus was explaining that Baltimore secondary has been playing quite a bit better. But it's kind of a wait and see approach with Deontay Johnson. But Pickett, his play's kind of fallen off. He's had a couple of bad games in a row, which is kind of concerned because every week, Billy and Fantasy Pros, I kept ranking it ahead of Deontay. It's like, why are people still ranking Deontay as top 30 or top 32 every week?
He's so bad.
I was dropping him outside of my top 40 and was hitting whereas Pickens became the guy. But his play, the last couple of games have been pretty rough for him. So
it's funny you mentioned that. Baltimore is actually bottom 8 on the season versus the wide receiver position, but in the last 4 weeks, their trend are top 10 versus the wide receiver position. So they've definitely improved. This is one of those things, though, we can't make a decision tonight because Deontay Johnson hit the injury report. If he's out, it's a smash Pickens play. If he's in, this thing is a little bit closer. So go ahead. Again, Discord channel is here in the chat right down below. Join us on Discord. Ask that question on Saturday night. Next question we have is, with Mike Williams coming back, should I flex Mac Hollins or just stick with Josh Palmer? I'm going to hold off on this one because if Mike Williams is in, I'm going to start him over Mac Hollins. And if Mike Williams is out, I'm playing Josh Palmer. So I'm probably waiting. I'm not playing Mac Hollins tonight. I'm going to wait on the Chargers. What about you, Jody?
Oh, agree totally. Yeah, Hollins would be a distant third in that list. Mike Williams, obviously we saw in Week 11, significant risk of re-injury, but I'm guessing they're not going to trot him out again until he's pretty close to 100%. So I feel like if he's active, I feel pretty confident in him. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't. I wouldn't start Hollins tonight. I'd rather take my chances with the upside of the other two.
So in addition to the last question we have, James Cook and Pickens, would Dameon Pierce add anything for you here? Would you start Dameon Pierce over any of these guys, or would you still wait to see what happens with Deontay?
You worry about I probably would lean towards Pierce in that group. You do worry about a 17.5 point road underdog in the Texans, who right now look like they won't have either of their starting 2 wide receivers. So this could work one of 2 ways. It feels like they're going back to Davis Mills, by the way, so that would probably help them slightly. But feels like, are they going to get blown out 42-0? Highly possible. But the Texans aren't the kind of team that can be built to avoid giving touches to their best offensive player. I know they've the play calling has been pretty questionable for the last month, but it feels like regardless of how bad they fall behind, that Pierce has kind of taken on, especially with Rex Burkhead being dinged up. He's kind of taken on more of a role of a feature back type of role over the last 6 weeks or so. So it feels like even in a really, really terrible game script narrative for the Texans being 17.5 point road dogs, it feels like Pierce is still a safe bet for 15 touches minimum. So, you still kind of like him. And, Dallas, their run defense is not the best in the league by any means. So
I still wait until we get the information for Deontay Johnson. If Deontay's out, I play Pickens over Damian Pierce, but as of today, I lean Pierce over the other two. That is it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Tomorrow I'll be live with Jim Coventry from Roto Wire. We're going to be live at 4 p.m. Eastern time. That's 1 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be talking about our running back rankings and our wide receiver rankings. We're going to be talking about the differences, the similarities, and comparing them to ECR. So tune on in for tomorrow once we have some more injury updates as well. They'll be able to kind of get some more clarity on what's happening this week. And we'll see you then. And then I'll be back on Saturday solo as we talk about the final injury reports and answer our start sit questions. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a good night and good luck in your matchup.